Putin's Russia loves the image of self-reliance. A fortress nation, proud, besieged, building its future with its own hands. That's the myth. The reality is much more embarrassing. Again and again, when the Soviet or Russian system hit a wall, it did not save itself. It reached outward for Western machines, Western engineers, Western designs, Western chips, and Western code. That's the part the propaganda hates. Once you see the pattern, a lot of Russian strength stops looking original. It starts looking imported, copied, or adapted from somewhere else. And that matters because the same system now wants to do with AI what it once did with factories, bombers, and the internet. Take a tool built in freer societies and bend it toward coercion. So here is the real question. If this empire is always bragging about standing alone, why does it keep surviving on imported strength? I'm Elvira Bary, a writer born in the USSR. And today, I want to show you the technology trap, the long, humiliating pattern in which Western knowledge keeps rescuing a coercive Russian state, only to be turned back against the world. Here's our roadmap for today. The weakness within. Why closed empires struggle to innovate. Bought from America. How Western business helped launch Soviet industrial muscle. Copied for survival. How espionage and reverse engineering replaced open trade. The liberal gift. How the 1990s brought Western tools into post-Soviet Russia, turned against us. How those tools were repurposed for surveillance and control. The AI trap. Why the next transfer could be the most dangerous of all. If you want to keep this channel independent, you can support it through Think Tank membership, PayPal, Superthings, or Hype Points. And if you are listening on Spotify, hit follow, so the next episode lands in your feed. Now, let's start with the weakness at the center of every closed empire. It can command obedience, but it struggles to create. The weakness within. Authoritarian regimes are usually much weaker than they look. They can police, censor, and imprison. They can stage parades and issue hugely inflated statistics. But none of that means they are good at creating new things. Real innovation is a fragile plant. It needs trust, open discussions, and room for mistakes. It needs property that cannot be seized on a ruler's whim. It needs specialists who can tell the boss, this will not work, without ending up ruined. And this is exactly what authoritarian systems fear most. A closed empire wants obedience, not argument. Loyalty, not independent expertise. Predictable reports, not unpleasant surprises. It can force people to build, but it seldom, if ever, creates a messy environment where new ideas grow on their own. That is why these regimes so often become parasites. They are good at absorbing technology from outside and very bad at building such technology at home. The Soviet Union was a perfect example. In the late 1920s, Stalin wanted a giant industrial leap. He wanted tractors, factories, machine tools, and heavy industry fast. Because the regime understood something very simple. Without industrial muscle, it might not survive. And without visible industrial triumph, it would struggle to justify its own rule. But there was a problem. The Soviet state could command labor and terrorize peasants. It could seize grain, jail engineers, and issue 5-year plans in a voice of total certainty. What it could not do was magically create modern industrial know-how from thin air. This is the first lesson I want you to underline, because it matters far beyond Soviet history. When a dictatorship boasts about self-sufficiency, you should immediately ask, self-sufficiency in what exactly? And this weakness at fostering innovation doesn't disappear just because the regime is large, disciplined, or scary. In fact, size can make the illusion worse. A huge state can hide failure for a long time. It can shift resources around, cannibalize one sector to save another, buy expertise abroad. But underneath all that noise, the basic defect remains. People are rewarded for pleasing the hierarchy, not for telling the truth. Every closed system keeps running into the same wall. It wants modern results without modern freedoms. And when that doesn't work, it looks to the outside world for rescue. Bought from America. The first great rescue of the Soviet Union came from Western capitalism. That is the irony at the heart of Soviet industrialization. The regime that preached hatred of capitalism turned to capitalist firms when it needed machinery, designs, and production expertise. And American business was quite willing to help. Ford is one of the clearest examples. On May 31, 1929, the Soviet government signed a contract with Ford Motor Company for technical assistance in building an automobile plant and manufacturing vehicles. The future gas plant in Nizhny Novgorod grew directly out of that deal. And Ford was not alone. Albert Kahn, the great American industrial architect, and his firm became deeply involved in Soviet factory design. The Albert Kahn Legacy Project notes that from 1929 to 1932, his company oversaw the design and construction of more than 500 factories in Soviet Russia. One of the best symbols of this moment was the Stalingrad tractor plant. The plant was designed with American involvement, built with American supervision, and equipped with machinery from dozens of US engineering companies. American engineers supervised installation and early operation. Later, during the Second World War, that same tractor plant became part of Soviet tank production. Soviet propaganda later presented industrialization as a heroic triumph of socialism. But that triumph wouldn't be possible without American and German brains and hands. I have a dedicated video about American workers and engineers who came to the Soviet Union to build its industry. And here's another question. How could the broke Soviet state even afford that kind of assistance? That was made possible by brutal extraction at home. First, the Gulag system. It used prisoners and unpaid labor to produce timber, which was then sold abroad. Another key source of income was the peasantry. The collective farm system effectively functioned as modern serfdom. Peasants were stripped of land, tools, and livestock, forced to work state-owned fields, and paid little or nothing, sometimes only a mark in a ledger. The grain they produced was then sold abroad at below market prices. The system became the Soviet response to the Great Depression, undercutting Western farmers who could not compete. At home, however, it led to catastrophic, man-made famine in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and beyond. Another lane was wrenching resources out of a starving society. The Bolsheviks had already confiscated church valuables in 1922, and later, as the industrial drive accelerated, the regime searched feverishly for gold and foreign currency. These were squeezed from the population through the Tarksin system. People turned in the precious items they still had from better times and got the money to live through another day. The state sold their valuables abroad, and that money paid for imported equipment, materials, specialists, and technologies. Copied for survival. With the Cold War, the Soviet Union could no longer buy what it needed so easily. A closed empire still needed outside knowledge, designs, secrets, formulas, and shortcuts. But now the American industry was not going to sell them any. And the Soviet resorted to espionage, capture, or reverse engineering. This is the part many people still misunderstand. The Cold War is often remembered as a clean duel between two self-contained systems, each producing its own miracles. But that is not really what happened. The Soviet system still fed on knowledge from outside. It just did so undercover. The atomic bomb is the most famous example. Yes, Soviet science mattered. Yes, the USSR had real physicists, real laboratories, real engineers, but American and British secrets were stolen and passed to Moscow through espionage networks that included Klaus Fuchs, Harry Gold, David Greenglass, and Julius Rosenberg's circle. This matters because it shows the pattern again. The Soviet state wanted the prestige and security of nuclear party. It wanted to stand as a world power. But when time was short and the stakes were existential, it was too risky to rely on pure internal development. Instead, the state reached into the enemy camp and stole what it could not produce fast enough by itself. And sometimes it did not even bother to hide the copying. One of my favorite examples are almost comically blunt. During World War II, several American B-29 bombers made emergency landings in Soviet territory after missions against Japan. Stalin ordered Tupolev's bureau to copy the aircraft exactly, bolt for bolt. The result was the Tupolev Tu-4, the Soviet Union's first long-range strategic bomber capable of carrying nuclear weapons. But in fact, it was nothing but a reverse-engineered B-29. The regime that glorified its own industrial genius took a foreign machine, stripped it down, copied it obsessively, and turned it into a symbol of Soviet power. The same logic extended into the myth of the space race. People like to imagine that contest as American genius versus Soviet genius. But a lot of the early rocket age was also about captured German expertise and imported personnel. The right line that this was a race between our Germans and your Germans is crude, but it gets at something real. Both sides absorbed knowledge and talent from Nazi Germany. The difference is that in the Soviet case, this fit a larger pattern. The regime kept pretending to civilizational self-sufficiency while borrowing, seizing, or copying key building blocks from elsewhere. The liberal gift. In the 1990s, the West looked at Russia and saw a broken country on its way to becoming normal. The ruling idea was connect Russia, modernize Russia, integrate Russia, and politics will follow. Openness will help. This was the most optimistic phase of the whole story, and optimism can be just as dangerous as greed. In April 1993, at the Vancouver summit, the United States and Russia agreed to establish a commission on technological cooperation in energy and space, headed by Vice President Al Gore and Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin. That commission grew into the Gore-Chernomyrdin Partnership, a broad framework for cooperation in energy, space, science, technology, business development, environment, and more. In September 1993, Gore said its purpose was to expand American trade and investment with Russia and advance cooperation in energy, space, and other advanced technologies. That sounds noble, And in one sense, it was. The Cold War had ended without nuclear catastrophe. There was a real desire to prevent chaos, strengthen reformers, and pull Russia into a rules-based modern order. Western governments were trying to prevent a wounded empire from collapsing into something even worse. But here is the trap. The West kept assuming that technical modernization and political modernization naturally travel together. That if a country gets more connected, computerized, and exposed to modern systems, it will also become more pluralistic, lawful, and accountable. That assumption was disastrously naive. Technologies don't carry a moral passport. They are not liberal or democratic by nature. They are just tools. Authoritarian regimes can easily use them for control. Turned against us. Here's the tragic part. By helping Russia modernize, the West unsuspectingly helped build the tools through which the Russian state would later control society. This is the part many people still resist because they want technology to be innocent. But technology has no loyalty. It goes where power sends it. The internet is a perfect example. At first, the Russian internet really did feel chaotic, open, unruly. It allowed journalism, argument, organization, scandal, humor, panic, and improvisation. It was messy in the way free societies are messy, but the state studied that mess very carefully. It learned where the switches were. It learned who owned the platforms, who carried the data, who could be pressured, who could be bought, and which systems could be rebuilt domestically. Then, little by little, the open network was turned into a managed one. You can see the logic clearly now. Foreign platforms become suspect. Domestic alternatives become patriotic. Data is not treated as private life, but as state territory. Communication is fused with identification. And every dependency that people have on their preferred apps and websites eventually gets exploited by the state. In 2025, Russia ordered the state-backed Max Messenger to be pre-installed on phones and tablets, integrated with state services as part of a broader push for domestic control over digital infrastructure. Then, in February 2026, Russia fully blocked WhatsApp and openly pushed citizens toward Max. Critics warned about surveillance. The authorities, of course, denied everything. That denial is part of the ritual. The AI trap. And now we come to the next transfer, the most dangerous one. Artificial intelligence is not just another machine or network. AI compresses all the old patterns into one tool. It can speed up research, sharpen surveillance, sort populations, automate censorship, improve military targeting, refine propaganda, and reduce the regime's dependence on human judgment all at once. That is why AI matters more than tractors and in some ways more than the internet. And if you have been following this channel, you can already see why authoritarian rulers would love it. The bottleneck economy depends on control. It depends on deciding who gets access. Traditionally, that required legions of bureaucrats, police, informers, and loyal managers. AI does not eliminate that machinery, but it can make it faster, cheaper, and more scalable. In other words, AI can help an authoritarian state govern with even fewer honest feedback loops and fewer competent human beings. That is an old dream of dictatorship. The Americans understood at least part of this. In January 2025, the US Commerce Department announced a framework for the responsible diffusion of advanced AI technologies, explicitly arguing that frontier AI has significant dual-use applications and that adversaries could use advanced American technology in weapons systems and other military activities. Then, in May 2025, the department rescinded the specific Biden-era AI diffusion rule, but said it was strengthening chip-related export controls for a different approach. That is the warning. The old Soviet pattern of stealing and adapting Western technology was slow. AI shortens the timeline. If authoritarian systems gain broad access to the best models, chips, training environments, and data pipelines, they become more efficient at repression. And unlike in the 1990s, nobody has the excuse of innocence now. We have already seen what modern authoritarian states do with digital infrastructure, how a connected society can be folded back into a managed one. So we should stop confusing modernization with liberation. The West kept imagining that its technologies would carry its values with them again and again. The Soviet and Russian system proved the opposite. It took the tool, stripped away the value, and kept the power. That is why AI is the final exam. If the West repeats the old mistake one more time, it may help Putin build a cleaner, faster, and colder form of control than anything the Soviet Union ever imagined. And now I want to hear from you. What's the most dangerous example you've seen of a useful technology being turned into a tool of control? And if you want to go deeper into how these systems work across power, money, and ideology, my Russian Treasures books and the other videos on this channel trace the same pattern from different angles. If this episode helps you see the mechanism more clearly, please like the video and subscribe. Share it with one person who still believes Russia's power is fully homegrown. And if you want to support this work directly, you can join my think tank or use PayPal or Super Thanks. You can also tap high points to help this episode travel. And if you are listening on Spotify, hit follow so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching. See you next time.